A man collapses onto the ice. He is 33 years old, broad-shouldered, strong, the kind of athlete people assume can carry any burden placed upon him, but at this moment, tears are streaming down his face. Not quiet tears, not hidden tears. He is crying openly, his shoulders shake, his breathing breaks. The entire arena watches as emotions pour out of him like a dam that has finally burst. Thousands of people witness the scene and feel their hearts tighten. What a beautiful moment, they think. What a powerful victory. But there is one truth hiding beneath those tears that almost nobody talks about. The man crying on the ice is the very person who is supposed to be the strongest. In pair skating, his role is simple to describe, but incredibly difficult to perform. He is the one who lifts his partner high above his head. He is the one who catches her when she falls. He is the one who must remain steady when everything else feels unstable. He is supposed to be the rock, the protector, the person who never breaks. And yet here he is, crying harder than anyone. Welcome to one of the most fascinating contradictions in sports. The person who appears strongest is often the most emotional. The person who supports others is sometimes the one most deeply moved. And somehow, those tears are not signs of weakness. They are the very reason two people eventually reached the top of the world. This is the story of Ryuichi Kihara. Or perhaps more accurately, it is the story of how Ryuichi Kihara and a teenage girl named Riku Miura crossed an ocean with no guarantees, no safety net, and no certainty that any of it would work. Why does the man responsible for holding everything together cry the hardest? Why did two athletes risk everything they had for a future nobody could promise? And what if one simple sentence spoken during the summer of 2019 had never been said? What if nobody had looked at the other and said, "Let's go"? If that moment never happened, the world might never have seen the Olympic gold medal. The world might never have witnessed those tears. This is a story about how strength and vulnerability are not opposites. They are two sides of the same coin. And it is a story about how people often become strongest during the moments when they feel most fragile. The journey began in the summer of 2019. At the time, Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara were living completely different lives. 17-year-old Riku Miura had recently separated from her previous skating partner and found herself standing at a crossroads. Her future in pair skating was uncertain. Across the country, 27-year-old Ryuichi Kihara had already experienced life as one of Japan's top pair skaters. But after losing his partner, he quietly began considering the possibility that his competitive career might be nearing its end. 9 years separated them. Different experiences, different stages of life, different futures. On paper, their paths should never have crossed. Then everything changed with a single phone call. Near the end of July, both skaters received the same question. Would you be willing to skate together? There was almost no time to think. The competitive season was approaching quickly. A decision had to be made immediately, and so they made one. They would become a team. Now pause for a moment and consider what that really means. When people choose someone to build a future with, they usually take their time. They meet, they talk, they learn about each other's personalities, they build trust slowly. But Riku and Ryuichi were given none of that luxury. In fact, Riku later admitted that her first impression of Kihara was far from warm. She remembered thinking, "He was difficult to talk to. He was 9 years older than me. I couldn't tell what he was thinking. He didn't seem like someone I could easily open up to." That was her honest first impression of the man who would eventually become her destiny on the ice. In some ways, choosing a pair skating partner is an even greater commitment than choosing a friend. Your safety depends on them. Your career depends on them. Your dreams depend on them. Yet these two athletes agreed to take that leap before truly knowing each other, and things moved even faster after that. The conversation happened at the end of July. Just a few weeks later, in August, they were already boarding a plane to Canada. Years later, Riku looked back and laughed about how sudden it all felt. It was basically, "Okay, let's go." It happened so quickly. Calling it impulsive might be an exaggeration, but not by much, because the truth is, they were not ready. Not even close. They didn't have visas finalized. They didn't have stable housing arranged. They knew very little about what awaited them. There was no detailed plan, no roadmap, no guarantee, nothing. "We went with almost no information at all," Riku later recalled. Think about that for a second. Moving to another country is one of the most difficult things a person can do. There is language, paperwork, money, culture shock, loneliness, homesickness. Any one of those challenges can overwhelm someone. Riku and Ryuichi faced all of them simultaneously, and they did it with almost no preparation. Why move so quickly? One reason stood above all others: their coach. The coach they believed could help them compete at the highest level in the world had recently relocated his training base to Canada. If they wanted a chance to become world-class skaters, they needed to follow. The choice became painfully simple. Stay in Japan and wonder what might have been, or leave everything behind and chase a dream. They chose the dream, but hidden inside that decision was a terrifying risk. Imagine if it failed. Imagine if the partnership didn't work. Imagine if the results never came. Imagine if the money ran out. Imagine if the loneliness became unbearable. For 17-year-old Riku Miura, there might not have been another opportunity waiting. For 27-year-old Ryuichi Kihara, time was running out. This wasn't merely a beautiful story about chasing dreams. It was a gamble, a massive gamble. Today, knowing how the story ends, it is easy to call it the right decision. But standing inside that airport in the summer of 2019, neither of them could see the future. They couldn't see world titles. They couldn't see Olympic medals. They couldn't see history. All they could see was uncertainty, an unfamiliar future, and the face of a partner they barely knew. Life in Canada proved every bit as difficult as expected, maybe even harder. Everything familiar was suddenly gone. Family, friends, language, culture, home. Every step outside the rink reminded them that they were strangers in a foreign country. And during those lonely days, one thing kept them moving forward: trust. More specifically, trust in the coach guiding them. Years later, Riku described it as an overwhelming sense of security. Their coach constantly repeated the same promise: "I will never let you fall." For pair skaters, those words carry enormous weight. A lift is not just a technical element, it is an act of complete trust. The female skater rises high above the ice. The male skater becomes responsible for her safety. One mistake can result in serious injury. Fear is always present. Yet somehow, Riku felt something extraordinary. She trusted him completely. In fact, she once joked that she had become so comfortable that she sometimes felt like even if she fell, everything would somehow be okay. The comment made everyone laugh. Even Kihara immediately responded, "Please don't say that." But beneath the humor was something much deeper. To trust someone that completely is rare, especially when everything else in your life feels uncertain. Their future was uncertain. Their living situation was uncertain. Their careers were uncertain. But one thing wasn't. The promise that someone would catch them. The promise that someone would not let them fall. And little by little, that trust began extending beyond the coach. It started growing between Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara themselves. When everything around you feels unstable, one reliable person can change everything. For them, that trust became the foundation of a partnership that would eventually shock the world. And perhaps that is why the image from the beginning matters so much. The image of Ryuichi Kihara crying on the ice. Because maybe those tears did not begin on the day he won Olympic gold. Maybe they began years earlier, in a foreign country, in moments of uncertainty, in sacrifices nobody saw, in the quiet promise to never let his partner fall, and in the realization that sometimes the strongest people are not the ones who never cry. Sometimes they are the ones who care enough to cry the most. Because he was the man who had crossed the ocean with everything on the line. Because he was the man who kept telling himself again and again that he would never let the girl beside him fall. The deeper that feeling became, the more impossible it was to contain. And eventually, in the most unexpected moments, all of that strength turned into tears. Strength and fragility were never opposites for Ryuichi Kihara. They were always part of the same thing: fear and trust, loneliness and comfort, uncertainty and belief. Carrying all of those emotions at once, Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara took their first steps in a country they barely knew. But those first steps were not glamorous. They were quiet, lonely, ordinary, and filled with uncertainty. Day after day, they trained in silence, far away from home, building something that nobody could guarantee would ever succeed. Then slowly, their first real test began to approach. The day they would skate in front of Japanese fans for the very first time as a team. In 2019, just 2 months after those uncertain days in Canada, Riku and Ryuichi returned to Japan. Their first domestic competition as a pair was the Eastern Japan Championships. It was supposed to be a memorable debut. The first time Japanese fans would see Miura and Kihara standing on the ice together. But the reality was far from glamorous. Because in the pair skating event, there was only one team entered: Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara. That was it. No rivals, no direct competition, no other pairs standing across the rink, just the two of them. They skated alone in a wide arena, completed their program, and officially finished in first place. But it was not the kind of victory that comes from defeating another team. It was a win without competition, a first-place finish that also revealed a cold and painful truth. This was the reality of pair skating in Japan at that time, and it explains everything. Why did they have to go all the way to Canada? Why was staying in Japan never a real option? Because Japan, despite being a figure skating powerhouse in singles, did not have the same environment for pairs. There were not enough teams to compete against, not enough world-level training systems, not enough coaches, not enough places where a pair team could realistically grow into world contenders. Japan had produced brilliant singles skaters for years, but pair skating remained an empty space, a quiet gap, a discipline waiting for someone to carry it forward. So when Riku and Ryuichi crossed the ocean, it was not only because they were chasing a dream, it was also because their dream had no real home yet. Their journey was both a challenge and in some ways an escape, a search for the place where they could become what Japan had never seen before. That lonely debut, with only one pair on the ice, said more than any speech ever could. But maybe that loneliness was also the beginning of something important, because when no road exists, someone has to take the first step. When there is no rival ahead of you, you have to become your own standard. When there is no example to follow, you have to build the example yourself. Whether they realized it or not, Riku and Ryuichi were carrying the empty space of Japanese pair skating on their backs. They were becoming the first footprints on a path that others might one day follow. Now look at how quickly everything happened. In August 2019, their partnership was officially announced. In September 2019, they competed internationally at the Autumn Classic. Just over 1 month after forming, they were already making their world debut. Then came the Eastern Japan Championships, their first domestic appearance in front of Japanese fans. And in November 2019, they stepped onto an even bigger stage. The NHK Trophy, a Grand Prix event. Think about that schedule: August, September, October, November. In only a few months, they went from newly formed pair to international debut to domestic debut to the Grand Prix stage. What most pairs build over several years, they were forced to compress into a few short months. It is easy to say they were not fully prepared. But they were never given the luxury of slow preparation. Ryuichi was already 9 years older than Riku. He did not have unlimited time left as a competitive athlete. Standing still was not an option. They had to build while running. They had to trust while skating. They had to learn each other while competing. That was the only road available to them. Then came the NHK Trophy in November. Only 3 months after becoming a pair, they were suddenly standing on one of the biggest stages in figure skating. What could a brand new team possibly do against experienced world-class competitors? Even they did not expect much. Later, they admitted that their goal was modest. They thought scoring around 105 or 106 points would be enough. That tells you everything. They were not thinking about winning. They were not dreaming of shocking the world. They simply wanted to survive the moment and perform as well as they could. But on the ice, something happened that even they did not expect. They finished fifth. A brand new pair formed only 3 months earlier, placed fifth at a Grand Prix event filled with elite teams. Riku herself was stunned. She later said she was surprised by how well they had done. And inside that NHK Trophy performance, there was one moment that seemed to quietly predict everything that would come later. At the end of the free skate, Riku and Ryuichi stood apart from each other. Then, from opposite sides of the ice, they reached their right hands toward one another. Their fingertips extended across the empty space between them as if they were trying to connect through the air. It was only a final pose, but somehow it felt like more than that. They had only known each other for a few months. They were still learning how to trust, still learning how to breathe together, still learning how to become a pair. And yet, in that moment, something real had already begun. From a dark and uncertain place, they had turned slightly toward the light. That fifth-place finish was not the destination. It was only the first sign, the first proof that maybe this impossible gamble had a future. But nobody knew what was coming. Nobody knew that this pair, who once competed alone in Japan with no rivals beside them, would one day become world champions. Nobody knew they would eventually stand at the top of the Olympic podium. Nobody knew international media would one day praise their skating as precise, powerful, and almost machine-like in its perfection. Nobody knew the world would one day cry with them after one of the greatest comebacks in pair skating history. In 2019, they were still standing in the dark. No rivals, no guarantees, no clear future, only a coach's promise: "I will never let you fall." only a fragile new trust between two partners who barely knew each other. And only the hidden tears of a man who had not yet cried in front of the world. But even in that darkness, they were moving, one step at a time, down a road nobody in Japan had truly walked before. Today we know where that road eventually led, but they did not. And that is what makes the beginning so powerful. When we look at successful people, we often focus only on the bright moments. The world records, the gold medals, the applause, the praise from around the world. But for me, the most moving part is not the medal. It is 2019. It is that lonely rink with only one pair competing. It is the decision to cross the ocean with no guarantee. It is the trust that became strong enough for Riku to feel that even if she fell, someone would catch her. Glory is never born overnight. It is built in quiet places where nobody is watching. It is built in lonely mornings, uncertain nights, and small steps taken when the future still looks dark. And the fact that the man who was supposed to be the strongest was also the one who cried the most does not make him weak. To me, it proves how much he cared. It proves how much he carried. It proves how deeply he had invested his whole heart into this journey. Those tears were not weakness. They were the evidence of everything he had given. And maybe that is why their story matters so much. Because somewhere, someone watching this is also standing in the dark. Someone is also beginning a journey with no guarantee. Someone is also wondering whether one small step can really lead anywhere. Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara's story reminds us that beginnings do not always look beautiful. Sometimes they look lonely. Sometimes they look uncertain. Sometimes they look like one team skating alone in an empty field. But that first step can still become the beginning of history. Now, before we close, there is one more thought worth holding onto. What if that summer in 2019 had gone differently? What if Riku and Ryuichi had decided not to team up? Ryuichi Kihara might have quietly ended his competitive career. After losing his partner, he might never have found a reason to stand up again. Riku Miura, still only 17, might have searched for another path after losing her place in pair skating. Their lives might have continued separately, two lines that never crossed. Two dreams that disappeared into different shadows. If that had happened, the world would never have seen their breathtaking precision. Japan would not have had its first great pair skating breakthrough. The gold medal would never have happened, and the tears that moved the world would never have existed. All of it began with one phone call, one decision, one sentence. Let's go. Sometimes life changes on a thread that thin, and there is one more image I cannot forget. That lonely Eastern Japan Championships rink. Only one pair, only one debut, only one quiet first place. If someone in the audience had known the future, what would they have felt? If they had known that these two skaters would one day reach the top of the world, that lonely victory would not have looked lonely at all. It would have looked like the first step of a long staircase leading to history. We live without knowing the future. That is why we cannot always recognize the beginning when it happens. But sometimes, the step you take in the dark becomes the first step toward everything. The next time Riku and Ryuichi stepped forward, a new challenge was waiting. Injury, pain, fear, and another test of trust. But that is a story for another time. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more emotional stories from behind the glory of sports, please subscribe and support the channel. Because behind every medal, there is always a hidden beginning.